you asked about stigma, I think that's a stigma that most of the country suffers from, right? Like we will not have anything to do with law enforcement. We want peace and we want no crime around us, but we don't want to have anything to do with.
It is the third largest um, in organized crime after arms and drugs, but it's the most inhuman because it actually objectifies human beings.
Right.
And where everything else is related to product, you're actually dealing with human beings. You've stripped them of every single human rights,
Right.
whether it's of choice, of dignity, of liberty, of movement, all of it.
Hey guys, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on another session of Dialogues That Matter. We can't thank you enough for the support you have been showing us, for joining us on every interview of this series. This is an interview where we speak to change makers who are doing work in their particular field, and their work needs to be heard, and what they're doing needs to be heard. Also, these conversations need a platform, and what these different people are doing is the need of the hour. To that effect, today we have two people who are here with us, who are going to be talking to us about something of great importance, which needs to be there in the forefront. Those of you who have been seeing our posts, this is a conversation on human trafficking, a conversation that needs to be had. And we have two people who are going to be talking to us from the Mudita Foundation. We have Neha Pradhan Arora and Anamika Rathur. Both of them are the co-founder and trustees. Thank you so much for joining us today, guys. Rather, girls.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so
Shruti.
much. We are super excited and stoked to have this conversation, because we really think this conversation needs to be had. Quickly, for the viewers who are joining us who don't know about Mudita, or the two of you, I'm going to introduce the organization and what you guys do. So Mudita registered as a charitable trust in 2018. The Mudita Foundation's vision is a world where each individual is living up to his or her full potential without fear, abuse, or exploitation. The organization's primary focus is to execute multidisciplinary solutions, build, enhance, and strengthen systems and communications to prevent, protect, and support those who are at risk, vulnerable to risk, or trapped in situations of or in situations of exploitation. And that's why today our conversation is about human trafficking, a little about Neha and Anamika as well. Perhaps you can raise your hand to say who is Neha and who is Anamika. So Neha Pradhan Arora, who is the co-founder and trustee as well, has worked in the education and development sector for over 15 years, with a focus on building capacities of young people in becoming responsible leaders for their own communities. Designing and conducting learning programs for children, young adults, and schools with an aim towards building more inclusive and empathetic communities is what drives her. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Neha. And we're really eager to know your perspective on this whole topic. Similarly, Anamika, no guesses for no points for guessing. Anamika has over 17 years of experience in the development sector. Her expertise lies in bringing the best out of people in an organization by setting up effective organizational systems and processes that enable teams to work towards their goal. She's passionate about working with vulnerable women and children, helping build a safer world. Thank you so much, and that's a lot. I think thank you for lending us your time, and happy to share your insights with us. I think let's get right to it, and let's start from the very basics and almost like the ABCs. Why don't you tell us what is human trafficking, and explain the urgency to kind of address this at the very moment in today's day and age and time. Whoever wants to take this.
Okay, so I'm going to take that if that's all right, Neha.
Go ahead.
I think there is a formal definition for human trafficking, but just to make it simple so that everybody can relate to it, I would define it as trading or buying and selling of human beings for the purpose of commercial exploitation, where there is a profit that is generated by the person who is buying or selling them. So the criminal network or the traffickers, they are profiting by the process of buying and selling this individual, right? So I think it's the simplest way to define it. You've taken the human being, you've turned them into an object, and you've decided that you can actually buy and sell them just like you would any other
Right.
inanimate object.
Right.
So that's what human trafficking is in
Right.
simple words.
Right.
Now, what is the urgency to tackle this?
Right.
In 2014, and I'm talking about statistic, which is what, 6 years old now, ILO estimated
Yes.
that the annual profits generated by human trafficking was $150 billion.
Right.
I think in 2019, Microsoft's revenue was 143 billion. So, I mean, the extent of the profit generated out of an illegal trade
Right.
in human beings
Right.
is massive, which proves to us that this is not something that is happening by the way.
Right.
It is a focused crime run by organized syndicates um, and at a very massive scale. The second statistic, which is of note, is that it is the third largest um, in organized crime after arms and drugs, but it's the most inhuman because it actually objectifies human beings.
Right.
And where everything else is related to product, you're actually dealing with human beings. You've stripped them of every single human rights,
Right.
whether it's of choice, of dignity, of liberty, of movement, all of it, right?
Right.
So that's the other part of it.
Right.
The third part of it, which is really critical for us to remember and remind ourselves why it is urgent for us to even talk about this issue, is that there is enough and more research which shows that 50% of the individuals trafficked end up being minors
Okay.
and children.
Right.
What are we as a society if we are unable to protect our kids?
Right.
I think
Right.
it's something for all of us as a wake-up call, right?
Right.
The other part of it is that it's such a complex issue that if it's happening in front of me, very often I will not even realize that it is happening.
Right.
It is clandestine in nature. It is unrecognizable in a lot of things because it's got so many multiple layers of dimension that, it may be just happening across the door and I won't know that it's happening. So I think these are just some. I mean, there's a lot that I can keep talking about why it's urgent to tackle it,
Right.
but I'd like to stop here. And if you have any further questions, kind of leave that
Yes.
for there. But I
Yes.
think this is definitely, I'd just like to add one last point.
Yes.
Anybody that has been a victim or a survivor of the crime, the kind of mental, emotional, physical toll it takes on an individual that has been trafficked is something that is really, really devastating and very difficult for individuals to recover from.
Right.
So it's just,
Yeah, I think
I'm
like you
done.
rightly pointed out, the very nature of it, right? Like it's almost like you're trading and treating humans as as objects, which is not what one should be doing. And also what you brought out that this happens at right under our noses, and sometimes we don't realize it. That's something we will definitely get to. Also, like you pointed out, it's mostly minorities or vulnerable sections that are more prone to this, right? To that effect, I want to talk about how you break down human trafficking, right? Which is basically the act, the means, and the purpose, which is what you have a couple of beautiful videos for the same as well, which we will link, and you guys can find on Mudita or other channels on YouTube, which we will also link. But could you talk to us a little about that and how that it just allows more perspective to this as well?
Sure. So, for something to be defined as trafficking, there are three components, like you pointed out. The
Right.
what, which is the act, what is
Right.
done, right? Then there is the second component, which is the means, how it
Right.
is done. And the third component as to the why is it done? And to
Right.
kind of define those a little bit more, for act, it is anything that is done, it's an action. So if I've moved somebody from one place, if I've indulged in the act of, recruiting them into the business, if I'm actually providing my house for somebody for an illegal purpose, or somebody who's been trafficked, I'm harboring them in my house, if I am actually doing the sale or the purchase
Right.
of the individual, that's all action oriented. And so that is what is being done, right? There is an element of an action in the entire spectrum of trafficking. The second is the means, right? How am I doing this? And this is very interesting. So a lot of people would assume that it is, forcible or abduction related, but sometimes it's just coercion. It is duping. It's false promise. It
Yeah.
is, I have a position of power, I'm your legal guardian, you have no control and decision making power, so I choose to decide what happens to you.
Correct.
So there are multiple ways in which this is done. The third is actually for what. So there has to be a purpose. So you're doing something, you're doing it through a particular platform, but the reason you're doing it is for an exploitative purpose. Now, again, the traditional views are the purpose is usually for maybe forced labor. People are aware of that. And a lot of people are aware about trafficking for the purpose of commercial sexual exploitation.
Right.
What one doesn't realize is that there are other underlying forms of trafficking: beggary, organ transplant for the purpose of organ transplantation, illegal adoptions, forced marriages, child marriages. Bride trafficking has become a very well-known phenomenon in the recent past. So I think it has to be for something.
Right.
And it's very important for us to recognize that whenever we talk about a trafficking case, all three of them are components that are visible. I
Right.
can talk you guys through a case, and I mean, Shruti, if you'd like, maybe you could help identify what was the act, what
The
was the
means.
means,
Right.
and what was the purpose, right?
Sure, why not? I think that might help us understand a little better. Why don't you give us an example and that would help us
Okay.
understand better as well?
So I'm going to take something which is not traditional. There was a family in the outskirts of, let's say, Delhi, and this child was about 14, 15 years old, dropped out of school because the family really couldn't afford to continue education, was put into, I think there's these fields on the outskirts of Delhi, so she was put into work there.
Okay.
um, there was a neighbor who was known in the community and used to stay close by, and the parents were very loving and considerate about the child, but poor.
Right.
They were economically deprived in that sense. So
Right.
the family members had to travel out of station
Okay.
and requested the neighbor to look after the girl who was left behind when they had to travel for the family emergency back to their village.
Right.
This lady started talking to the girl about the fact that there is a much better life in Gujarat.
Okay.
Come along with me. I will get you a job. You will make, three times the money that you're making right now. And you'd be able to save money. You'd be able to spend money, just this beautiful life that you kind of present. The girl
Right.
went along with her on the train. Her SIM card was extracted. It was broken. The phone was taken away. She reached Gujarat. She was kept captive in a house for some time. Um, Unfortunately, during that period of time, there was also some sexual abuse that occurred because there were people that were coming in and out of that house, but she wasn't allowed to really step out. She didn't know anybody in that place. She didn't have access to any communication channels. She was then given the option of working in a garment industry.
Right.
And so she started working in that garment industry
Right.
for much less than the minimum wage. I think
Right.
one of the days she managed to get her hands on a phone. She contacted her parents who were going crazy with worry, and then the family was able to lodge a complaint and bring her back. Now, in this entire thing, what is the act that you identify? What is the means, and what is the purpose?
It is a little tricky. The means is definitely, her going there and doing the whole thing in the minimum wage that she wasn't paid for, whatever work she was called in for. I'm a little confused as to what the act specifically was. Maybe taking her away from there could be the act. Purpose was again for work, or am I right in identifying it that way?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're right. The act was the actual movement, getting
Right.
her recruited, like convincing her that there was
Right.
something better for her,
Right.
and getting her recruited and moving her, and
Right.
then harboring her as well. So there were three
Right.
components within the same case. That's why I'm saying it's so complicated
Correct.
that there are multiple elements of the same issue.
Correct.
The means was through false promise. You
Correct.
will have a better life. You will get
Right.
more money.
Right.
You will be able to send money back home.
Right.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
So there was false promise, and and the third part of it was, like you rightly pointed out, for the purpose of forced exploitation. It was also unfortunate that though the purpose was forced exploitation, she ended up being sexually abused as well. And
Yeah.
that is the complexity of this issue. You
Correct.
may be moving for some other purpose. But in the process, exploitation that occurs with you could be of any form and any nature.
Right. Right. I
I
think,
don't know whether
yeah.
that helps clarify it a little.
Yes, I think definitely. I mean, that's just one example, and sadly, we have a number of examples.
Yes.
So it does help put things into a little perspective. One thing that you did bring up, which is an interesting point to make, and one happens to wonder, is that so when you just spoke about this, right? For example, the reason this young girl agreed to move away was because she was promised a better lifestyle. Like you pointed out yourself, she was economically deprived, right? So these are factors we cannot neglect in a country like ours, and a country like ours, in a lot of different sectors and different stratas, we are yet to develop, right? So kind of keeping all that in mind, could you talk to us a little about what are the hotspots for human trafficking in a country like ours, and what are the common vulnerabilities, and who are these people that are more prone? Rightly, of course, I'm sure it's the children, women, but if you could perhaps in your own experience share what you have come across.
Neha, you want to take that?
Yes, I will. Thank you. I think, Shruti, the example that Anamika just shared also helps us to realize how the concept of hotspots is changing. I mean, like growing up, when I would say, some films that we saw would tell us that, an illiterate girl from a really poor family in a remote tribal hamlet in some corner of the country is now getting trafficked and sold into the sex trade and is then being brought to, let's say, a Bombay or, a Delhi, and maybe sometimes going across borders also. And so one assumed that hotspots were really far away from where you and I live. But while that continues to be true, because the factor that you brought about vulnerabilities, what makes someone more vulnerable, and poverty continues to be one of the strongest factors that describes vulnerability. Because when my needs are not being met, then anything that will take me to a better life, that will help me to find that better life, or the promise of one, will obviously, I'll jump at that chance, right? And I may not think of, I'll try to break the debt cycle that my family is in. I'll try to think of, how will I help my older parents, my younger siblings, maybe they'll have a better life. So poverty, yes, definitely one of the strongest risk factors and vulnerabilities. Along with that, I would say, access, whether it's to education or to employment opportunities, to information, even to schemes and benefits, so even if there are schemes and benefits for vulnerable sections, sometimes just the absence of that access makes people more vulnerable also. All of this is related to my physical needs, right? If I'm not able to take care of myself and be self-reliant, then any opportunity I get to correct this, I will jump at it. And when my negotiation power is low, when my bargaining power is low, the chances of me getting exploited are obviously much higher. So keeping that in mind, yes, hotspots are the areas where, let's say, poverty is higher. So while this is remote rural areas, districts in different parts of the country, it is also, like the example that Anamika just shared, the outskirts of the big cities. So your low-income communities in big cities, in Delhi, in Bombay, in Calcutta, in Bangalore, in all our big cities, there are low-income communities where people have migrated from the rural areas because of the same reason, of I need a better life, I need to make, meet my basic needs. And then when that's not being met as much as I had expected, again, that makes me vulnerable to somebody who has the promise of a better job, or sometimes even getting duped for, let's say, being in a better place, a better a situation. So even education, you'll go here, you'll be able to work, you can study. So all of these promises, that aspiration, when that is getting fulfilled, that becomes, one of the risk factors. So definitely poverty, lack of access to all of these basic needs is one of the highest risk factors. And that gets compounded by something like social exclusion. So people, let's say, on the fringes of society already. In the beginning, you did mention, that there are groups that we identify as being vulnerable groups. And so whether it is a social exclusion or an economic one, this again adds to the risk factor.
Right.
And I go as far as to say that even looking at the power structures, so somebody who's, let's say, right at the bottom of that power hierarchy does not have the power to say, I don't want this, or I can live without this. So all those who are, and so factors like gender and caste and class, race, ethnicity, age, ability, all of these then compound the effect and make one more vulnerable. So in that aspect, it's difficult to say that only this kind of an area is a hotspot, but yeah, areas where these factors one can find in, let's say, greater magnitude would be the more vulnerable spaces.
Right.
Having said this, I also want to bring your attention to the fact that it's also going beyond this. It's not just economic factors now.
Yeah.
And for example, you rightly picked up on Anamika's example and said that, she wanted a better life. So vulnerability, let's say emotional vulnerability, or when I feel like I have nobody and I am all by myself and no one understands me. So anybody who befriends me at that time becomes someone I trust. And trust is one of the first factors that a trafficker will use to groom someone, or to build a story and kind of coax you or force you or dupe you into this saga that you get caught into, this web that you get caught into. Then so emotional vulnerability is not something you can map geographically, right? You can't say that it's only people in these areas. And we know that the internet is a place where a lot of people who are, let's say, putting themselves out there are then unfortunately getting targeted by the wrong people. So who is vulnerable? That the answer to that question has changed a lot in the last couple of years. It's not just somebody who's poor and illiterate. It could be somebody who's literate, living in Bangalore, living in Delhi, in an upper middle class family, but because there is something within them that maybe is making them reach out to people via the internet, makes them an easy target for somebody who's trying to recruit people, trying to groom them, and then pull them into that web. So what are the hotspots? Yes, there are some, especially those where poverty is can be found in great magnitude, but it's also now across class, across geographies, across social spaces. And that, I think that's the scariest part of the crime now, the urgency on why we need to tackle it, because it's no longer distant, it's no longer far away. It is in every neighborhood, in every city, tier 2, tier 3 cities. Again, very vulnerable, because there are youth there who feel they want this better life. They want to go into these, glamorous cities and build a life for themselves there. So easy to get them to sign up for a job and say, give me your passport, we are taking you to this other country. But what's going to happen once they are on that plane and once they've handed over that passport? Very, very difficult to, just pinpoint it and say that it's only these places. And yeah, I guess that's what makes it really scary, at least for me, that it's not just what we grew up believing, that it's far away, but the problem is really close now. So.
Right. I think it sounds very scary, and we're fortunate to be in the safety and have access to information, everything that you pointed out. And I was going to bring it up myself, tier 2, tier 3 cities, of course, it is an easy target. And what makes it even more scary is, like you just said, internet brings in a lot of other perils as well, because you put yourself out there. And like you rightly pointed out, I think, it just sounds very scary. But having said that, in that case, so for that matter of fact, even in the metros or outskirts of metros, I'm sure, like you said, we cannot pinpoint a geographical location, right? So then how does one perhaps, how can one navigate through the telltale signs of, say, human trafficking, or whether it's on both sides? Maybe how do we identify if this person or this section is vulnerable or prone to this, or how do we know who this person is? Because in your story, like you mentioned, this person was a neighbor, right? And the family entrusted this girl with the neighbor, saying, why don't you take care of her, we'll come back, right? So there's no, I understand there's no, you cannot say this is the person who's going to do this, but I'm sure in your experience, you must have picked up on some things. If you'd like to share something with us regarding that.
Correct. So, I mean, I think, there are places where, let's say, there are more vulnerable groups. So one can be a little more alert, and I'll try and talk about what one may be able to see, what one may be able to pick up on. And this goes back, in fact, to what Anamika started with, that process to understand that it happens in various places. It may start at a particular place, where the victim has, let's say, been picked up or has been groomed or recruited. Then the transport is happening. So there may be multiple places along that journey where you may see someone. And then ultimately, where is the victim sold to? Where does the person end up at? So in any of these places or in any of these phases, if one is coming across someone or something, there may be some telltale signs that may at least raise some red flags. It may not necessarily be a case of trafficking. There are other forms of abuse, violence, exploitation that also one may be able to see, but it is important to know when it could be happening around us. So for example, the first step, when someone is, let's say, being groomed, or when the trafficker is trying to build a relationship of trust with someone who is vulnerable in some ways, either economically or emotionally or socially. So how does that happen? So let's say there's a child or an adult near you, and they have suddenly, there's this new relationship or this new friend that they are talking about, they're talking about a little, but maybe not giving you too many details. They're being a little secretive about it, So what is this new relationship? And particularly if you see that there are, let's say, new objects or gifts or favors that this person, this child or this adult is getting from this new friend, I think it should set off some alarm bells, that who is this new person? What is this relationship where you are receiving so much material gifts, so many things, and what are you having to do in return for that? So at least those alarm bells should go off. Let's say someone's saying they've been promised a new job, and it seems like it's too good to be true. There's just too much that's being promised to them. So I think these are situations where we may think that, okay, let's ask more questions at least. It could be that it's, just a reticent and a very, let's say, introvertish person who doesn't want to share, or a teenager who doesn't really want to tell you much. But at least we should try and ask more questions to see, is this really what it seems to be? Or is this a case of the child or the adult or the teenager getting groomed by someone into a relationship of so much trust that ultimately they will say, okay, I'll go and meet this person alone somewhere, or I'll go to another place. Or, I mean, there are so many cases of young teenage girls eloping with someone who they felt they are in love with or in a committed relationship with. And then, before they know it, when they're in another place, they've been sold to someone, and then they have no way of getting back to their family. So just to be alert to, okay, this is a new thing evolving in this person's life. At least let me find out more about it if I'm someone who's, let's say, close to that person or in the vicinity of that person.
Right.
Another stage where in our, let's say, when we are just in our lives, when we are traveling, when we are moving around in our cities, in our towns, we may have people around us who are, let's say, being transported. And I feel that's why that even, the public transport system, or let's say long distance travel, and when you're in a bus or you're in the train, or even when you're in a flight, there may be situations where, again, you may be suspicious. So let's say there's a child and an adult traveling, and the child seems uncomfortable in that situation with that adult. The child is also, when you're trying to talk to the child, maybe the child is not giving you too many answers or giving you vague answers, or the person with them is not to them too much. Maybe they don't have too much baggage with them, which may seem unusual if they are like on a long journey. Sometimes it could be an adult, or it could be a group of children also. So again, what I'm trying to say is that these are signals which should raise red flags, and we should maybe just try to see if this is a situation where someone is being abused or exploited or trafficked. So it could also happen that, let's say, like Anamika said, when you're in transit, there are places where children or teenagers or the victim could be harbored, or, so a hotel or a lodge or an inn or a place like, so people who work in the travel industry, people who work in hospitality, I think they are often in situations where they see some of these things around them, but maybe they don't know that this is also happening. They're taking it at face value and saying that, this is just a child traveling with someone, and this is just a relative, or they believe maybe the story that's being told. One may also sometimes come across a situation where the victim has already been sold, or is currently where they were brought to. So for example, a child working in a home or in a hotel or a tea stall by the roadside, or a shop, begging at the signal, children or adults begging at the signal. Maybe an adult working in what seems like an exploitative situation, because I'm not sure whether they're getting the wages that they were promised, or even the minimum wages, or a fair, working and living condition. So again, some of these things we see, but I think we've just normalized it so much to say that, it's okay, and at least they are working and they're getting, something to eat. And so sometimes they don't even raise these alarm bells, and they don't seem like red flags to us. But I think whenever we see situations like this, where there does seem to be fear in the situation, to answer or to tell you more, it may at least tell us that there is something wrong in this, and someone needs to find out and do something about it. So I'm not sure I've really simplified it, because, like Anamika said in the beginning, it's a very complex, problem and situations, and it often just seems so right that one really needs to force oneself to say that no, this is not right, and one does need to find out then what is really happening in that situation. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I've confused you more or
No, it's
simplified
just that it just adds to the complexity of the entire situation, right? Because there's no short way of saying that maybe this could be, someone who's human trafficking this kid, because it could just be a relative who's maybe the kid is angry at the relative he or she is traveling. Like, it could be just anything, right? But again, I think this conversation would be incomplete if I don't ask you. Let's say one does identify something like this, or one is suspicious of something like this. What does one do after that? Is there a helpline number? Does somebody get in touch with, like, what is the procedure after that?
Okay, so I'm gonna try and respond to that. So I think as a society we've been for me the biggest achievement that we've managed is that we've recognized it as a formal problem. Like it's a global issue. We've recognized it as one. We are the government of India has officially ratified the United Nations Conventions against transnational organized crime, which does refer to human trafficking as an area of concern that needs to be tackled. The Constitution of India, in its Article 23 and in Article 20 and 39, does refer to ensuring that there is no exploitative situation, that people should not be trafficked for any form of forced labor or for any form of control, and that the systems should be created to protect them from any exploitative situation.
Yeah.
Right. So there is the law that exists. There is the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act,
Right.
which was carved out in 1956. Unfortunately, that specific act is focused primarily on tackling trafficking for the purpose of commercial sexual exploitation. It doesn't really encompass other forms of trafficking. It's used as an instrument largely around that. But the nice part about that particular act is that it does cover elements of prevention, rescue, rehabilitation. So
Right.
the entire spectrum of support that an individual would need in this context is kind of governed by it. Our Indian Penal Code, Article 370, provides for action against any kind of human trafficking.
Right.
One of you asked whether there was any contact point, right, for kids.
Or a helpline or something that
So
immediate
for
action.
children, if you are worried that this is a minor and that the minor seems to be in an exploitative situation, where you feel that there's trafficking plus abuse and exploitation that is taking place, because please remember, at all points in time, it is for a purpose, and the
Right.
purpose is exploitative. So you're
Right.
seeing the exploitative situation. You may not recognize that there's a chain of trafficking behind it. But
Yeah.
the minute you see a minor in that situation, I think 1098, which is our child line number, right? That is the best place to go and make that call, to let them know that there seems to be a concern around it.
Yeah.
For the others, I think that the challenge is there's still no specific helpline number, so you still have to go to the police and probably file that as a complaint to say that, what, I think there's something wrong happening here. I think this needs to be looked into. Now you can choose to do it as an anonymous informer, or you could choose to do it as a formal complainant, saying that I'm aware and conscious of the fact that this situation is exploitative and trafficking has occurred, and I'd like to lodge a formal complaint. So I think these are some of the platforms that exist. I think one of the biggest challenges is that there is a need for a more comprehensive law and a more comprehensive response,
Right.
which unfortunately we are still struggling with. I'm aware that there is a common helpline number that our government has launched, which I believe is 112, which is supposed to be similar to emergency services. And I'm assuming that, if one was to call into that, we would be able to mobilize the necessary support required for instances like this as well.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that does help a little bit and kind of completes that bit of the conversation. At this point, guys, those of you who have joined us live via Facebook, if you do have any questions, please do drop them in the comments. And Anamika and Neha would be happy to answer them. And please do ask as many questions as possible. Even if it's silly, it might just sound silly to you, but we're here to just increase awareness and information regarding this topic as well. At this point, I think I would like to talk about is there any stigma attached with human trafficking? And if someone, say, as a bystander, wants to intervene and help, but then steps back saying that, maybe I don't want to get into this jhamela per se, kyuki, I just want to stay away of it. And again, especially if you get the legalities and things like that into it. What is it that you have seen in your experience? And could you also perhaps elaborate a little bit about what are the laws that are available currently in India, and how does it favor stopping such incidences? Is what I'm trying to ask. Yeah.
Okay, so you've asked a lot of really interesting questions.
Yes.
I've already talked a lot about the laws, right? I've
Correct.
quoted the Constitution,
Correct.
I've quoted the IPC.
Right.
So there are laws.
Right.
There is legislation that we as a society have carved out. We've recognized it as a problem. There is certain legislation. I will
Correct.
reiterate the fact that there is increasing need that we have in society for a more comprehensive legislation. So right now, because this issue is so complicated and
Right.
the nature of this issue is constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
The criminal network is regularly evolving. So what is
Right.
applicable in the legal system currently may not be applicable 3 days later because they would have evolved.
Correct.
And another form and another platform would be used, which is not currently being addressed.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the biggest challenges that our society faces is the fact that the speed at which this crime is evolving and the speed at which we are able to create response to that is different. It's difficult because as we all know, we've been trying to kind of put a comprehensive bill together and it's still not happened, where we look at trafficking in its entirety. All forms of trafficking are looked at. You're referencing various different complexities because right now when you go after the crime, you have to apply a different set of legal protocols and laws to get the person who is involved in the crime prosecuted.
Got it.
So it's not it's very difficult to say, okay, there's this one rule or this one act or this one law. It's multiple different elements, and you have to be able to identify what is the crime and which of these laws can be applied to kind of impact that. Now, one of the things that you asked, if I'm not mistaken, was what do I do as a bystander, right? I don't want to get into the legalities of it. I'm worried about what it would impact. And I think a couple of things that we always tell people, and I'm reminded of the quote that Benjamin Franklin, kind of mentioned, which is that justice will not be served until those that are unaffected by the crime are as outraged as those who are. When it happens to me, it's personal, right? When it's happening to some third party, not somebody I know, it doesn't seem as personal. But I think I really worry, and I've noticed this, that we tend to ignore certain social evils, and very soon we are faced with them in our lives really quickly. Whether it's gender discrimination or anything of that sort, right? At some point in time, somebody that is close to you will bear the brunt of it because we've not actually addressed it as a community. And so I think it's important for the bystanders to kind of let's first start with awareness, because I understand this issue is so complicated and complex that it is difficult for you to understand what the issue is. So first start with understanding what human trafficking is, being able to recognize it if it's happening in and around your community. Start with simple steps. Nobody is asking you to, join and go straight into a legal battle with the criminal network. That's not the ask. But start by asking the right questions. Start by saying that it's not okay
Yeah.
to see somebody in an exploitative situation, that I will not practice exploitative situations. I'm a bystander. I'm not doing anything great to tackle the issue, but I can start with myself, right? I can make sure that if I am employing somebody, I'm paying them fair wage. I'm asking if they are being brought to me by somebody else. I'm making sure that the person who's bringing them to me is not exploiting them
Yeah.
in that chain.
Yeah.
I'm making sure that the products I use, right? We know that there is a supply chain in most of the products. And we're also aware there's enough and more news from time to time about exploitative practices in the supply chain. If I'm conscious and I raise a voice and say, I'm sorry, but I don't want to use this product because I know it actually employs
Yeah.
exploitative practices, it employs minors, it doesn't pay the right wages, I will not use it, whether it's cotton or chocolate, my favorite lipstick shade. I don't care, right? I'm saying there's a lot that as bystanders we can do. Uh, and also, I think report it anonymously. If you don't want to get into the legality of it, report it anonymously. Find people that are willing to take it up
Right.
actively,
Right.
so that at least something is being done. I think some of those is what I mean. I'm happy for Neha to add if she thinks there's more. But I think these are some of the things that I definitely think we can do on a daily basis.
Right. Neha, you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one thing, and Anamika can probably, add on to this from her experience. But sometimes also, in our intention to do good, we may actually be putting the victim, the survivor, at greater risk. And one should be conscious of that also. That doesn't mean we, don't raise the red flag. But like Anamika said, there are some systems in the country that do allow you to raise the red flag anonymously with the right people who are equipped to handle the situation without putting the child or the victim at greater risk. So just to be conscious that when I want to help also, how do I keep in mind this really complex situation and get the right help? So, I mean, it could be the police, it could be 1098. There are a lot of organizations working in most of the big cities and a lot of the regions of the country. So maybe just finding out, what is my local resource here, which is the organization working in my city, trying to help survivors or trying to work with victims, and can I at least keep their number handy if I'm scared of the legal system. Because when you asked about stigma, I think that's a stigma that most of the country suffers from, right? Like, we will not have anything to do with law enforcement. We want peace and we want no crime around us, but we don't want to have anything to do with law enforcement. So that stigma, I think. And also somewhere I think the stigma that the problem is there because of somebody else's fault. Like, we don't see it as a systemic problem yet. This family did this, or this person couldn't earn a living, or that person is alcoholic and hence sold their child. So it's easy to pinpoint an individual, but I think we need to start seeing it as a failure of, a larger system, larger society, a breakdown of what we would hold as common values. And probably when that stigma goes, that it's not that person's fault that they are in this situation, it is a failure of all of us, then probably we'll be able to, take that step up and say that, no, I have a connection with this problem and hence I need to be able to say something. So
Yeah. I think that's a very fair point. I mean, rather than pinpointing individual circumstances and individual, examples, it is about addressing this as a system, as a community, and where we're failing together, right? I think that's my takeaway for the day. I think that's definitely something I will also keep in mind. I just want to go back a little to what Anamika said, which is about as a bystander. Primarily, it's about you. I mean, one of the things you can do is equip yourself with information, right? Because if you do that, it's one step in addressing this problem. To that effect, I want to ask, a lot of our understanding of issues like this comes from media, right? Whether it's print media, whether it's films, whether it's advertisements, whether it's radio, whatever it is, the different kind of medias. What has it been like in your experience on how media tackles this? Does it add to the stigma? Does it add to the scariness per se of the whole situation, or does it actually help to kind of tackle things at the ground level?
Okay, so I'll try and answer it from my understanding, because I'm always conflicted about the role that media plays. Right? You're right. They do. I think they do create awareness. It's a brilliant tool to raise the issue. And I remember both Hindi episodes as well as a lot of international films which talk about whether it's for forced labor, exploitative practices, where somebody is kind of moved and sold, and either they've been put into labor or they've been commercially exploited. I remember we were having a discussion, and we mentioned Mardani, for example, right?
Right.
One of the conversations, in fact, and I think I'm actually not worried about them displaying the scariness, because it is scary.
Yeah.
That entire process for the individual that is living through it is really scary. So I don't think they are dramatizing it in some instances. Of course, some it's not all the time, all the cases, but there is a lot of truth to the representation of
Yeah.
the level of exploitation that the individual in that situation can go through.
Yeah.
And we have dealt with cases which are very similar to the ones that sometimes get depicted. So
Yeah.
I don't think that media portrays it larger than what it is. In fact, I think they can play a much wider role than they're currently doing
Right.
in building awareness around it. And I think one of the challenges that happens is that they don't do enough on the preventive side. They are depicting the crime
Correct. After
and
it
the
happens.
impact and the after effects,
Yeah.
right? I think we can do more as a society and as media. We can
Right.
do a lot more in raising the profile of the issue so
Right.
that it doesn't happen. The prevention part of it is where I think we end up lagging. That's my personal
Right.
perspective.
Right. Neha, you want to add to that, perhaps?
Yeah, just that, I think also media, we need to look at in two ways. I mean, one is popular media, right? So that's
Right.
the serials and the movies and everything that we are getting fed all the time. The other is how does news, how does print media and, how does it get represented in the news? Do the cases get reported? So one is anyway, reporting of the cases is tricky, right? Once it gets reported and when there is official data around it, when let's say the report, the National Crime Report Bureau, when that comes out, can that data be highlighted? Can there be discussions around that? Can we look at which regions are being reported? Where is it being reported more? Is it being represented equally all over the country, or are we just focusing on picking up on certain cases? So there's certainly a lot more that the media can do. And one of the things we at Mudita are keen to explore is also this representation. Where is the data coming from? Where is it not coming from? Is there a pattern to it? And how can we try and fill in these gaps? How can we try and bring in more data so that this becomes a part of the discourse in the media? And this becomes part of, let's say, headlines and people talking about it and raising an outcry about it, and not just that once in a while sporadic, mention that happens, or even once in a while in popular media. So can it become a part of the popular discourse more also? I guess that's one of the things we as Mudita have been trying to do right from the beginning, that this is a gap and this is something we want to very consciously do so.
Right. Right. I think this is a good segue to get into what is it that Mudita does. I think if you could highlight whether you are in the prevention space, are you in the intervention space, are you in the rehabilitation or the aftercare? And then generally, what is it that Mudita does, as well as particular to human trafficking, the work that you do, whoever wants to take this, or both of you.
So Anamika, is it okay if I start
Yes,
and you
please.
can?
Yes.
Yeah, so both Anamika and our other co-founder Joyita have worked a lot in the anti-human trafficking space. And so from their experience, I think what we realized was that while there are these three parts of the process, prevention, protection, and prosecution, and that does look at the protection, does look at rehabilitation and reintegration of the survivor. When we started, I think we tried to look at some of the gaps and how can we begin to address that before we get into all parts in this process and this phase. So since we've begun, I think prevention has been the largest focus of our work. And one of the parts in that prevention has also been to make this conversation a part of everyday conversation for everybody. So not just limited to, let's say, some organizations in the development sector talking about it, or just law enforcement officials talking about it. But why can't schools talk about this? And why can't colleges talk about it? And why can't civil society organizations like, say, Rotary clubs and, Lions clubs and conversations like this on social media, so why can't everybody start talking about the problem, realize the role that they play in this problem, and then start identifying what they can do as part of the solution? So that's been one of our focus areas. And so we do try and have as many conversations as we can on various platforms. So this was an incredible opportunity you brought to us also. Along with this, trying to help organizations who work with children in already vulnerable spaces, primarily in urban, to look at what are these vulnerabilities and are they even recognizing that human trafficking is a problem. So when we work with partners in, let's say, Delhi or Bangalore and organizations working in urban slum communities, they'll say human trafficking nahi hota hai, yahan ye hamare yahan problem nahi hai. But when we start exploring it further, so children are going missing, okay? Children are running away, or let's say somebody ran away to get married. Kidnapping is happening. नौकरियों के लिए बच्चे बाहर चले जाते हैं. So all of that is happening, but nobody's connecting the dots and realizing that this is all part of that larger crime. And hence our responsibility to keep our children safer is greater. So part of our intervention right now is also with partner organizations who are working with children in and women in vulnerable communities, youth in vulnerable communities, just trying to get them to acknowledge that this is a problem and that they do have a responsibility to creating, that safety net around the children, the women and the youth they work with. So that's part of what we do, on the issue of human trafficking. We are hoping as we grow, in time and in team, that we are able to look at other parts of the process also. But as of now, this has been our focus. The other part of our work is also working on the issue of child sexual abuse and online abuse. Like we mentioned earlier, the internet has become a space where this crime is, it's increasing really rapidly. And it's again, we are not very sure of what we are dealing with here, so the ambiguity makes it even scarier. So trying to figure out this space by, again, initiating conversations, by looking at maybe, more research in these areas, just to document what are these trends, so that, like Anamika said, we are better prepared to have a response system then. So working with partner organizations, with schools, trying to build their capacity to identify and tackle abuse and violence, which also then makes someone more vulnerable to being trafficked. So we're trying to look at it at, like, right now, this step, and then see how we can take it further. So with all our partner organizations, trainings, helping them build their child protection policies so that they know what is their commitment to safety, campaigns that we like to do with, let's say, school children or college students, so that once they are aware, how can they take it to more people. That's these are some of the areas that we've just started working in, and yeah, we are hoping that we are able to have take steps in other directions also.
So
Right.
I just wanna add. Yes, we've talked a little bit about our focus being children, right? Because if you start at that age, they're the most vulnerable. They're the easiest to dupe. They're the easiest to kind of build that trust and groom for the purpose of trafficking. But I think
Yeah.
for us, having these conversations in addition to schools and colleges and academic institutions, we're actually looking at building this awareness across. You talked about the bystander, and it is my intent to get this being a conversation in every household. So, the best example, sometimes I look for examples, and I've realized that when we talk about climate change, every single person today is realizing the importance of climate change. And so they go around switching off their electricity, you're being told switch off your engine. And I'd like for us to reach a place where every single individual understands that exploitation, abuse, and trafficking is wrong and shouldn't be either indulged in, or if we are seeing it, we should be able to recognize it and tackle it. So
Right.
I think for us, we've also done it with corporates. We're happy to kind of build awareness with corporate entities to make sure that every single person gets to hear about the issue, so that they can do something about it. We've done it with vulnerable community women, right? It's not an issue of just one of the things that I wanted to break here is the myth that it happens with vulnerable communities. I have known of cases where educated, college going, from excellent families, kids have gotten trapped into the trafficking nexus, and they are
Right.
being put into an exploitative situation, right?
Right.
um, and they are stuck. Either somebody is blackmailing them. And so this whole idea that, you know what, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do. I'm hoping that having these conversations with people, one, they will be able to recognize that, oh my God, this has happened to me. Somebody had told me about this, and this is what I can do to get out of it if I ever get stuck.
Right.
Two is just keeping myself safe. I mean, yes, it's about the rest of the community, but each of us needs to be aware that we are as vulnerable to somebody who's trying to exploit or dupe us as anybody else who has increased vulnerability. So I think for us, that has been the definite focus, to make it an everyday, everybody's issue.
Right, right. And if you want to add about perhaps something specific about what is your other work, or anything particular that you want to get into, or if you want to, or if that's all about all of it, then that's okay as well.
So I think there is an, sorry, Neha, you want to?
Uh, so I was just wanting to add on something that has been our learning over the last 10 months, over when the pandemic happened, and conversations that we had with our partners, when more organizations now have realized that children are at risk, whether in their home or online. It's not just the outside space that's dangerous and where children are vulnerable. So that realization has brought partners to us to say, we need to know how to tackle this. And
Yeah.
one of the questions we've started exploring with them now is, how do we build resilience? We've been hearing this word over the last year in the context of the pandemic, that how do we all adapt and how do we bounce back? But can we think of resilience as being something that we build in communities so that they can prevent abuse from happening, so that they can prevent violence and exploitation from happening? And what we hope to do over the course of this year is, one is document the voices of children, telling us what their experience was like. When have they felt most scared in the last 10 months? Was it just the virus, or were there other things that made them scared and vulnerable too? And then based on that learning, and to talk to lots of people around us, bring them together and see, can we create models that communities can then start building within themselves for this resilience? Can we use sports for it? Can we use dance for it? Can we use theater? What are all these tools, and how do we bring them together? Because at the end of the day, this problem will not be solved by just one organization or 5 individuals. It needs everybody across sectors to come together, bring their expertise together, and only then we'll be able to close the loops and actually break this cycle, and hopefully children will be safer, and women and everybody who's vulnerable will be safer then. So yeah, in terms of an exploration and what we are trying to do now, this is another focus area, and I thought I could mention that. So
Yeah, I
Sure.
just, sorry,
Yes.
just you mentioned prevention, prosecution, and rehabilitation as well, right? So there is intent on our part at some point in time to get into the nuances of actually rescue, rehab, and prosecution work. Not exactly at this point in time. We started with prevention because we believe that that is, I mean, it's better to start with trying to make sure the problem doesn't exist. But we do have the intent in due course of time to work in collaboration with other partners to tackle the issue on the rescue and prosecution and rehabilitation and aftercare elements as well. But it's a slightly more desired futuristic plan, and hopefully we'll be able to do that soon with continued support from all our existing stakeholders that we've engaged with. But I think what I wanted to reinforce with what Neha said was the whole collective
yeah.
action, right?
Yeah.
And so in our model, collective action is our buzzword. We have to work at this problem as a collective and not as an individual organization. We won't be able to dent it. $150 billion industry, the governments are barely able to make a dent. So I don't think any single organization can actually tackle. So it's absolutely critical for all stakeholders, civil society, government, me as an individual, all of us to take collective action to make an impact.
Right. I can just say slowly but surely, I hope we get there. One step at a time. I think this conversation is a step in that direction. I just checked. We don't have any questions. I'm assuming everybody's just sinking in all the information that we have shared. So perhaps if you guys could tell us how we could get in touch with you in case people have any questions, perhaps directly if they would like to get in touch, whoever wants to share some details or your website or anything. We will also add that in the comments and things like that.
Sure. So we do have an active presence on social media, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can find us as Mudita Foundation NGO or NGO Mudita Foundation. And I'm sure Shruti will tag us so people can probably find us. We also have a website, muditafoundation.in, which is still in a process of growing and getting updated, but it'll tell you how to get in touch with us. We are always looking for people who share this dream and who have this same conviction and want to do something. So if you're an individual, you're a school, you're an organization, you're a corporate, you're a residential housing complex, anybody at all, and you feel you want to know more about this issue and you want to do something, drop us a line or get in touch with us, and we'll definitely try to find some way in which we can bring your commitment into this collective action also. So we are hoping that many of you do reach out to us. And Shruti, thank you. We hope we continue to engage with you and dialogues that matter, continue to have dialogues with you and a lot of other people, because these are the small steps we take in that direction. So.
Right. So I think as much as we'd like this conversation to keep going, and as much as there's a lot that we can keep talking about, we are reaching towards the end of this conversation. One of my questions was something that you already answered, Neha, but perhaps if you have something to add on to it, which was that the last year and a half has been it's unprecedented times, testing times that we've kind of gone through together. What has been your learnings in the context of COVID, perhaps particular to human trafficking, and what are the learnings that you have had in the past few months? You did mention one of the things, perhaps something you'd like to add on to it, or perhaps Anamika as well, either of you.
So, I mean, the one thing that we did see is that it's kind of, given everybody a jolt. It's shaken everyone up, not just in terms of how the world can shut down, but also that risk exists right in our homes, and it comes through that device, or it's in my home, or it's in my neighborhood. And I think that's what a lot of people have now realized. So that is one of, we've seen there is enough data and news articles that have spoken about how child marriage has gone up, child abuse has gone up, child pornography cases have gone up. So there is enough reporting happening also. And I think that's what people are waking up to and saying we need to do something. So that's one thing that we saw happening increasingly over the last 6 months. While the internet is one of the most dangerous spaces, it's also at this time helped us to reach out to organizations around the country who are saying, help us, we need to know how to identify this and tackle this. And because right now we are physically located only in Delhi and Bangalore, in normal times, we may not have been able to, help that organization, but today we are. So whether it's Bombay or it's Calcutta or it's somebody in Lucknow, we are able to come together on virtual forums and we are able to look for common solutions. So I think both these are things that I see as, okay, something that is helping us to move ahead.
Right.
But Monica, you can add on to that also.
Yeah, so I think it's quite evident to everybody. There was enough and more media attention on the fact that there has been massive loss in employment opportunities, right? The most hit were the ones that were daily wage earners. That automatically means that they were trying to go back to their villages. There were going to be a higher vulnerability situation for them, and they were therefore far more vulnerable to being trafficked. It is far easier when you're down and out. And that is what COVID kind of hit home.
Yeah.
So either you were stuck at home with your abuser, that was one thing that got highlighted and talked about constantly. The other was, everybody's losing their jobs and people don't have food to eat and they don't have, they have to go back home because they can't even afford the cost of living in the city because they're not getting anything to sustain themselves. So just this massive focus. And so, one of the things that I realized was that it finally reached the attention of the government as well. I know that there was action that was taken by the Ministry of Home Affairs to increase resources and to deploy further resources to tackle the issue. So there was recognition that the vulnerability to trafficking, to other forms of abuse has increased, and we need to do something about it. I think that is what COVID ended up doing. So, like Neha said, I think the positive out of that was it got enough attention. It stopped being a little less under the table and it came out, and people started kind of talking about it a little bit more. And so there's more desire to try and impact that.
Yeah. So the last, but definitely not the least, thing that I really want to ask is, while there were tough times, what is the one thing that kept you optimistic, or what is that one thing that you were grateful for in 2020? Whoever wants to go.
So I'll go first. I think despite the challenges, there was a lot that we at Mudita were grateful for. I think we were grateful for our partners and donors. There was, one assumed that there would be a dip in people wanting to step out and support because their own lives were impacted in such a big way. But that was not true. Actually, people stepped up and wanted to both partner to tackle the issue as well as contribute to the issue being tackled. So I think that is something that I'm super grateful for. I'm super grateful to be working with this diligent, passionate, driven team at Mudita. We're a small team, but wow, we've got some amazing team members doing some fantastic work. And so I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful to be working with friends, people who believe in a common vision, who believe in a common cause. And so I know that we're only going to go from strength to strength from here. And I'm thankful for people like you, Shruti, for giving us platforms like this, where you recognize that there is a need for spaces to talk about complex issues. That if we don't have that dialogue, then we're just going to end up not being able to cope eventually. So yeah.
I think you're here to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Neha?
No, just all of the above, I think.
Right. Right. I think if that's all, that brings us to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much. A massive shout out to you guys for giving us your time, for letting us kind of pick your brains and understand, what goes into human trafficking, the nitty-gritties of it. And the main thing to talk about this at different levels and not think of this as an individualistic or circumstantial kind of a happening per se. So thank you so much. I definitely had a lot to learn, and I'm going to keep coming back if I have questions or just things I want to know. But thank you so much, Neha and Anamika. This has been wonderful. Those of you who have joined us, thank you so much. We hope to be coming back with more and more conversations with such people, with topics and conversations that we hope you would like to learn about. Thank you so much. We are super stoked that you were here with us on this Friday.
Thank you once again for having us.
Thank you, Shruti.
Thank you so much. See you guys. I will see you next week, next Friday. Until then, stay safe, stay positive, stay optimistic. I will see you guys next week. See you.